you hear now? I got the mic on. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, well, I think we just prayed, so I guess we don't have to open in prayer, so we'll just start. Today we actually should finish chapter 2 of James. So we've been working on that for a little while. So we'll be in James chapter 2. And I moved my marker. I believe it's verse 13 that we're starting with. 14. Yep. So anybody, it's what we're going to be in today is 14 through the end of the chapter. So we should do 14 through 26, and hopefully we'll finish it. Or either way, we'll finish it, even if we have to just wrap up on chapter 2. Does anybody want to read those verses, 14 through 26 of James chapter 2? Okay. I really like this chapter, and I like James, but I like that chapter because way back when we started this in the introduction, Ryrie was talking about how James is kind of written in for practical application, for practical daily use. It's got some definite theological doctrines in there, but it makes it very practicable. Instead of just talking about faith and the benefits of faith, he's saying, okay, well, show me. How are you going to show me that you believe what you say you believe? And that's what I like about this chapter. So we've mentioned this before, that Martin Luther was not a fan of James. And I think this part of chapter 2 is the biggest reason why. Because of what James is stating. What was that saying that Martin Luther said? Grace alone, faith alone, through grace alone, something. And so he was not about the works, because of what he came out of, because of the Catholic Church and all of that. And to him, he was always trying to work out his salvation before he came upon the idea of salvation through grace and God's grace. So I think this is the good counterbalance to that both are true. And so what I wanted to do today is just have a conversation about what do we think this means, that faith without works is dead. And I don't know. I don't want this the pat answer. The pat answer is, well, yes, because of your faith, it should result in works. That's true. But practically speaking, if we say we believe, and we have this faith in what we believe that in our salvation, how does that practically work out in our lives? Because I don't think it's a one or the other. I don't think it's strictly what you hear a lot. Well, even in that verse, for by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourself. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. You have both right there again. You have grace and faith. And now James is talking about, in that verse, is not of works, lest any man should boast. So people will point to that verse when we get to this chapter, right? But the practical side of it is, if you say you have this faith and you believe, James is making the point, and we're going to read those two passages he references. That's what I want to do today. He referenced Abraham and he referenced Rahab. You know, if Abraham just had faith, then why was the sacrifice on Sinai necessary? God knew his heart. God knew that he had faith. There had been times where Abraham had doubted. That's how we got Ishmael. But God already knew Abraham's faith. So what then was the point of asking him to offer Isaac, right? I don't think it was for God. I don't. Even though that's how, when we're going to read that passage, I think that was for Abraham to see just how much he really trusted God. Because we already know God knew the end of what was going to happen. But yet we have this account, and I want to read that. But any discussions before we even get into that on this passage? What do you guys think? You've been alive somewhat longer than I have, and you've studied this quite a bit more than I have. What do you think about James chapter 2 when it talks about faith without works is dead, and that, you know, if you have faith, you should have works? And then that verse we just quoted, you know, by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourself, but is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. What do y'all think about these two things side by side? Any thoughts? Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And
We've got to be careful that it's not all works if you have the faith. Because there's a lot of people out in the world that does great things.
yeah.
Help the poor, give money and everything. But by itself it's not enough.
Right.
Although it looks good and, you know, it's helpful and needful, but you still need faith.
Right. Okay. And that's what I think, and we're going to go read those two passages. We'll start with Abraham and then we'll go to Rahab, because that's how it happened chronologically. But I think in a nutshell, to me, it's never been that big of a conflict, because I think, and I could be wrong, but I think when we make a distinction is because we have to separate, like you said. Some people will do a lot of works, which is where Martin Luther was before he came to understand grace. They're doing the works in order to please God to get to heaven, right? And that's not what James is talking about. He's not talking about, I want you to go out and do all these good works and feed the poor and clothe, you know, the naked and do all this wonderful good stuff so that God might be happy with you and accept you into heaven. I mean, that's like what a lot of Muslims do, right? That's not what this is saying. And I think that's where we need to make the separation. The faith and works that people try to say are in opposition to each other, or the idea that salvation is by grace alone, faith alone, and there's no works involved. Well, that's true enough for your salvation, because Jesus paid it all. But James isn't talking about doing works for your salvation. That's not what this is, and I think people try to get confused on that. His point is simply, and I think that's what we're going to see in these other passages. Rahab's a little different, but if you have faith, and again in that verse, I like to point that out to people. This is just my take on it, and Pastor Milton can correct me if I'm wrong. When we quote that verse, by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourself. And it's a gift of God, and that not of yourself. I'm messing the verse up now. For by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It was a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Okay, we always put the emphasis on the grace. But the gift is not grace. The gift is faith. Read it in context and study that verse out. For by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourself. It is a gift of God. The faith that you've been saved through. You have to have faith to believe. Even the faith that we get to, that's how I take it. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. But I've always read that verse. People say, oh, grace is the gift. No, the gift is not grace. Grace is what God poured out. You know, grace is what we experience, but the gift is faith. If you didn't have that seed of faith to believe, there would be no salvation. At least that's the way I read it. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, right, yeah. Right. Right. And see, I think that, yeah, sorry. Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's what I think this is. It's not so much well, if you don't have works, you don't have faith, and if you don't have faith, you don't have works, which is what we make this. I think it's the point you said, and that's what I take out of this. It's not that it's one or the other. It's because of your faith, the works should follow, not because you're doing works to get to heaven or to earn your salvation. You're doing the works out of love for the Father. That it should be a natural byproduct of our faith. And James is making the point, you can't say, which is what I think I see a lot, and sometimes in my life and a lot of our American culture Christians, we say we believe God and we've said the right things, and because of that, because of grace, and it's all Him, and because I believe that, well, I'm going to go to heaven regardless. And we chase that rabbit all around, and we have lost the fact of what James is trying to say. If you say you have this faith, if you've truly believed, and God has given you the faith to believe, where is the results in your life that should be evidence of that? And I think that's what he's trying to say. Not that the works save you, but that he's asking us to question, if you say you have this faith, and I like how you tied it back into context, if you say you believe this and you have faith in God, why are we showing partiality? Back in context, why are we doing these things when God says we shouldn't? And I think that's what he's pointing out here, is that you can't just claim to have this faith and live this other way, that there's no evidence of a love of God in your heart or obedience to what God says. I think that's what he's trying to say. But let's go back and look at these two passages that James cited. He cited Abraham and he cited Rahab. So let's look at those real quick. I was hoping that little parallel translation I have, because I was like reading out of the other ones. I went to, but that's just my New Testament. So I was like, darn, because I wanted to read this out of one of those. But we'll read it out of here, and we'll read it. I'll read it real quick, and then we'll talk about it. First, we'll do the one in Genesis 22, is where you find Abraham and Isaac. Sorry about this. Getting old for the birds. Okay, we got time. Yeah, Genesis 22. Now it came after these things, this is after the covenant with Abraham, that God tested Abraham and said to him, and there's that tested again. We just talked about that in church a while back and in our book study. How God tested Abraham. And that goes right back to what we were saying, Katie. Abraham, he said, and Abraham said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son Isaac. I'm going to stop just for a minute. It just hit me right now. You see how God just totally ignored Ishmael right there, because he wasn't the son of promise? Isaac wasn't the firstborn. Ishmael was, that Abraham had through Hagar. And there's a whole passage in the Bible, I don't know if it's after or before, I didn't read all that again last night, where God promises to take care of him. And he does, and he makes a great nation out of him, and hence the conflict with the Jews and the Arabs to this day. That's you can make a whole study off of that. It's pretty interesting. That one act, when he listened to Sarah and with Hagar and they had Ishmael, that's why there's this argument over the land with the Palestinians and the Jews. This is where it starts. And they both have a lot of point. Jews say, no, Isaac was a son of promise, which he was. And the other ones say, yeah, but Ishmael was the firstborn. The father's land goes to the firstborn. And there is your genesis of the whole conflict with the Arabs and the Jews over there. But anyhow, we won't chase the rabbit. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, my word. Yeah. Yeah. And I really can't chase that one, but I would like to ask you about that later. When they keep talking about that and Trump keeps making a big, the only reason it's a good thing, I guess, I just don't like how he always keeps taking credit, because my mind can't help but go to when there's going to be this treaty with Israel for 3.5 years. And I'm like, I'm starting to, I was going to ask you about that, how when the Antichrist shows up, he makes a treaty and then he breaks it. And I'm like, but that's a whole other choice and a whole other thing we're not going to discuss right now. Yeah, that's my brain keeps saying, wow, we might be seeing the beginning of something else here. But anyhow, let's get.
Have you seen the magazine, and I'm going to read to get them again. I used to get them for years. My husband had them. Israel My Glory, and it gives you an awful lot of what's going on now over there and everything. And I was thinking about that because my daughter and I were talking about, what's going on in politics, and they don't always agree with me.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was a fabulous magazine, and I want to look it up and
Yeah,
order it.
that can still.
That we got it for years, and the church I went to, they had them out for people to just take one,
Wow.
and they were great. To know what's going on over there, because right now
Right.
I don't know what's going on in the whole world.
Right.
I don't even listen to the news anymore.
Yeah, it gets depressing. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to chase that one. But okay, so here we go. So he says, Abraham, he said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son. And he split wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. And on the 3rd day, so this was a 3-day trip. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. And Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder. See, he was Southern. And we will worship and return to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. And Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the 2 of them walked on together. Now we're starting to see where the faith is coming in. Well, the whole thing is faith, just obeying. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. And he said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and beheld behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his thorns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "In the mount of the Lord it will be provided." And then we keep going on and we talk about the blessings and the multiplication and all of that. But in that part of that chapter, this is what James is referring to. And I really like it when we've all read that before, but when I was studying that again yesterday, I said, I'm going to go read that again. And you see well, first off, you see the obedience of Abraham. And we've got to remember, Isaac is now, whatever he is, a young teenager maybe. And we've got to remember, before then, all those years, Abraham waited for the promised son. And hence Ishmael through Hagar, because they doubted. And they were getting older. And Sarah said, it's not going to happen. I'm too old, right? And again, so there's Hagar and Ishmael, which God just totally ignores in this passage, just like Ishmael is not even there. Your only son, Isaac, he mentions it twice. But we got to remember when God told Abraham to go do this, what that meant to Abraham. Look how old he was now. And this was the son God had promised him. And for him to be willing to be obedient, which goes back to what Katie was saying, our faith should result in obedience. When God said, Abraham, I want you to go and do this. And he was like, okay. After all of that, and he's probably, I would be. I can't speak for Abraham. Maybe his faith was that great. I would have been in my own heart. What? We had to wait this long? It finally happened? I'm going to go kill my son? What is this? Back to the book we're studying, that would be a question, be like, what am I hearing here? Am I hearing what I think I'm hearing? How can this be? But he goes, and he just goes in obedience. And I'm gonna look at that again. He says, verse 2, God's not pulling punches. He said, take Isaac, go offer him. So for Abraham's point of view, when he starts out, God just told me to kill my son, the one he promised me. Come on, that would be something, right? And so when they're going on, and it's a long enough journey, 3 days, and then at one point, Isaac just says, Dad, I see you got, and I think that's kind of cool too. This is just me being a nerd. He's carrying the fire in his hand. They didn't have matches. They didn't have Zippo lighters. They had to get the fire burning and had to keep it burning. So that's, to me, is just a whole other thing you can look at for fun. Back then, fire was something, and you had to keep it. You had to keep that fire going to keep a, if you ever seen Castaway with Tom Hanks, same idea. He had to keep his fire going once he finally got it going. It was a big deal for him to keep that thing burning because he didn't have matches. We won't chase that one either. But Isaac sees that. He sees the fact, well, Dad, you got the wood. Saw you split it. Saw you put it on the donkey. I see you got the fire in your hand. But, Dad, you forgot something. Abraham's old. Isaac's probably thinking, Dad, going to sacrifice. Dad, you don't have an animal. Where's the sacrifice, Dad? And Abraham, his answer to his son was, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering. Yeah. No. Well, no, and I can't, no, and that's my point. I can't imagine me doing that. And then look at the context. This is the son of promise. Abraham's old. Yeah. He knows he's probably not going to have, well, he actually does have more kids. There's something to be said for that. After Sarah dies, he has more children by the other. I don't know what's going on there, but at any rate, Abraham's old. Here's the son of promise, and he's been told by God to sacrifice him. And that's what I was saying. That man was, that man, yeah. Yeah. That's what I said. After Sarah died, he had more wives and more kids. And I'm like, gosh, he was in his over 100 by then. And he's like, he was something. But let's not chase that one. That's a whole other commercial for something. So at this point, when Isaac asked that, this is what I've often thought. So here's again a sign of Abraham's faith, of which James is referring. God will provide for himself the lamb. Abraham is somehow in his heart believing God is going to do something. God is going to provide something. I know he told me to sacrifice Isaac, but this can't be because he's promised to bless me and all my, all these, descendants that were to come. He goes, it can't be this. But yet in obedience, he was going to it. And he got to the point, which a lot of sermons have made on this, that he put him on the altar and was at the point of killing him. And I've heard pastors say that he had to believe that even if God would have killed him, then would have had him go through with it, God would have somehow raised Isaac back up from the altar, is what they say Abraham was believing. I don't know. I don't know what Abraham was thinking about that. I'm not going to speak for Abraham. I know I would have been torn in half as a human being to think, God, I don't understand. But the faith in God, in God's character, and in his obedience, which is, I think, what James is referring to, that true faith should result in our obedience, which should produce good works, right? It comes full circle. Our obedience to God, if our faith is genuine, should produce the works we are doing out of obedience to God. So here you see it. And Abraham's faith was confirmed to himself when he went to the point of raising the knife and the angel stopped him and said, don't do it. The verse says, now I know. I think God knew, but this is just my take. I could be wrong. I think it's like, now we both see what you're willing to do to be obedient to God. There is no doubt that you will do whatever God asks. Your faith is genuine. Stop. Look over here, get the ram that God provided. We know the rest of the story. And then again, the promise is confirmed in how he'll greatly multiply his son, which is what Abraham was trusting at the beginning. He's promised me an inheritance. He's promised me all these kids. This is the one. But he says to kill him. But when he got to that point of obedience, God stopped him and said, now we both know, and I will fulfill my promise. And again, you have the blessing of inheritance. So there's the picture that James is referring to. Abraham did have faith. And he was called the friend of God. That's the verse I was looking for earlier. 2 Chronicles says, Didst thou not, O God, drive out the inhabitants of the land before thy people Israel, and give it to the descendants of Abraham, thy friend forever? That's 2 Chronicles. He was called a friend of God because of his faith and obedience. Yeah. Yeah, I'm assuming young, yeah. Well, he was obeying his father, and Abraham was obeying God. You again have a picture of obedience, yeah. And that's what Marlene mentioned too. That Abraham was obeying God, and he didn't understand it, but his faith and his obedience was there. And then Isaac being obedient to his father. And again, and I don't, we got to go to the next one because we're running out of time. Something that Abraham said to the guys that came with him. Hold on, I've got to flip back. I'm in 2 Chronicles, darn it. Sorry, I already skipped away. Flipped off that passage. Anyhow, he tells the two men, he goes, you wait here, and I and the lad will return to you. I can't read the exact verse because I've already flipped off of it. That's faith. Because Abraham at that point was still going to sacrifice his son. But he told those two men, I and the lad will return to you. So that, I mean, my goodness. The faith and to trust in God and the obedience to do what he asked, even when he didn't understand, is what James is getting at. Your faith should produce works that show that you truly mean what you say and you are willing to obey God. And to Katie's point, why is there this showing favoritism in the church? Why is this happening if your faith is genuine, when you take it all in context? That's what James is pointing to them, that if one is true, the other should follow. Any comments on that before we hit the one about Rahab? Okay, we'll go to Rahab. That happened next. This is the other one that James mentioned. And this one is not quite as cut and dry. We can see the beautiful picture of the covenant to Abraham, the promised son. This I really like because this is real life right here. This to me is a really good story that I encourage everybody to read on its own. Because, backstory, you have all that we see in Egypt and all that with Moses coming out, the crossing of the Red Sea. They defeat that one little city-state when they come into the land, and then they rebel. And then you have the 40-year wandering, right? So they've been in the desert 40 years. The people have been dying off, like God said, because of their lack of faith. Only Joshua and Caleb would go in. Even Moses is gone now in this story. God showed him the land, but he didn't get to go in. So this is what I like about this story. Because why did Rahab do what she did, right? Well, we're going to find out right here. But this is, to me, this is a picture James mentions of faith and works, right? And Rahab was not Abraham. She wasn't promised anything of God. She's just a person that lived in Jericho that had heard about what happened, right? They'd heard about what happened when the Israelites came out, crossed the Red Sea. That story got around. We'll see that here in a minute. This is what I really like about this, is an example of faith and why James mentions her. Okay, so we'll read this real quick in a few comments. Joshua chapter 2. Then Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." So they went out and came to the house of a harlot, prostitute, whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. I'm going to stop there and make a quick comment. That was a smart move, because nobody in the city would have thought anything about 2 strangers coming in and going to the prostitute's house. That's what she did for a living. Everybody in the city knew it. It wouldn't have raised any eyebrows, right? Okay. And it was told the king of Jericho, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." And the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land." So the king was aware these 2 guys from the Israelites have come in here. We've seen him. Apparently they have spies, people watching people in the city, and they went to Rahab's house. So he tells her, "Bring them out." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them, and she said, "Yes, the men came to me, and I did not know where they were from." In other words, I didn't know these were the Israelite men. I had no idea. I didn't know they were spies, right? Here she is. She's covering. "And it came about when it was time to shut the gate at dark that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them in the stalks of flax which she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued them on the road to the Jordan and to the fords. And as soon as those who were pursuing them had gone out, they shut the gate. So they lock up the city for the night so nobody can come in. Now before they lay down, the spies, she, Rahab, came to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all of the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you." Now remember this. "For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven and above and on earth beneath." This is no one who has any knowledge other than what she's heard of what's happened. And she's making this profession, that he is the God in heaven and on the earth beneath. "Now therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth. And spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." She knew what was coming. So the men said to her, "Our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours, and it shall come about when the Lord gives us the land, that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you." Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. And she said to them, "Go to the hill country, lest the pursuers happen upon you, and hide yourself there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go your way." And then we have the rest. Well, I'll read it real quick because it's important. "And the men said to her, 'We shall be free from this oath to which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window through which you let us down, and gather to yourselves into the house your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household. And it shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if a hand is laid on him.'" And then it goes on, "If you tell about it, we're free, blah, blah, blah." But here's the point. This is something when I read this every time, I think a lot of, but maybe not. Maybe it's just me that gets easily impressed. But I think a lot of people miss what Rahab is saying here. I don't know if she was that old or if the story had been told down. I want to think the story had been told down because and she'd be pretty old to be in her business if she was alive when it happened. But she's telling them, we have heard of what happened over 40 years ago when the Red Sea dried up and they came across. That's what she said, how the water dried up. And the terror of the Lord came upon their hearts, and they had no strength left in them. God had prepared them for destruction. The people were weak with fear. They knew that something was coming, right? And remember this when you read this story. But because the Israelites disobeyed God and didn't have faith to believe the spies, They wandered for 40 years in the desert. This is after the 40 years, because it's fixing to happen now. For 40 years earlier, God had already put fear in the hearts of these people that they were to be destroyed. And I'm sure they thought at first, when it first happened, it was coming. And then all of a sudden, well, gosh, what's wrong? I mean, I'm sure there's probably, I'm assuming, they sent out, what are these people doing? They came in, they came out, there's this miracle, they crossed the sea, they destroyed these two little kingdoms, and now they're just wandering in the desert? I'm sure they were confused, right? Because I'm assuming this is, generations have passed, the ones that didn't believe have died off. Same way here. Rahab has heard this from probably her parents and her grandparents of hey, there's these people came out. Their God did this. They destroyed the Egyptians. They wiped out these kings. They're headed our way. And the fear was in them. God had put fear in their hearts. Their courage had melted, Rahab said, 40 years earlier. Look what disobedience, if you want to tie in obedience through faith, look what disobedience through a lack of faith caused. 40 years earlier, they could have went in there and took that land. God had already melted the hearts of the people. Disobedience because of a lack of faith, which is what we're talking about, faith producing works. Look what happened. 40 years you're wandering and dying. 40 years they're sitting here. But when the spies came and she had heard, I remember my dad or my grandpa telling me about that. These are those people. Oh, man. That's their God that did that to the Egyptians. They're the ones that wiped out those kings. They're coming. They're coming. And so she hides them because she remembered. She said, she was shrewd. She had faith. She believed that, okay, God destroyed the Egyptians. He's giving you this land. We're going to be destroyed. She knew that. And so she struck a bargain. I'll keep you safe. I'll lie to the king. The footnotes in my Bible says she sent the pursuers the opposite way she sent these guys. So she deliberately sent the people looking for them the opposite way that she sent the spies. She told the spies to go hide in the mountains for 3 days so there's no chance of getting discovered. Then go back and tell Joshua. She did all of that, risking her life. If the king had found out that she had lied to him and that she hid the men, she'd have been dead. I'm sure as shooting, she'd have been dead. Because the king of that city said, bring them out. We want these men. They're here to spy out our land. We all have heard those stories that Rahab's talking about. We've all heard these people that destroyed, their God destroyed Egyptians. We want to know why these guys are here. They're trying to spy on us. They all knew. They were in fear of what was coming. And because Rahab believed and remembered what she had heard, and she hid them, and she said, look, since I've spared you, I want you to promise you'll spare my family. And the beautiful part of that story, which I'm sure those of us who went to Sunday school know, the Bible makes plain to say her house was on the wall. What fell in Jericho when they marched around 7 times? The wall. The Bible says it fell flat, not her part. Not the part her house was on. Think of that miracle. The rest of the walls fell flat, and here sits this little piece with the little scarlet thread out the window, standing. Why? Because she had faith. She believed. And they said, if you keep your family in the house and you keep this rope that you're letting us down on, and it was scarlet. You could do the picture of the blood of Christ on that. You could do a whole sermon on that. The scarlet thread, which goes to Nathaniel Hawthorne. Scarlet letter, sorry. Again, the color of the blood. And how, because she believed that what God said he was going to do, they were going to wipe out all of my people. I know you're here to destroy us. But if I keep you safe, you promise to keep my family safe. That's what James is talking about. Her faith in believing what she had heard from probably her parents, what had happened. She believed it. And she acted on it. And she said, I'm going to do this for you, but you've got to promise me this. That's the faith that James is talking about. The same faith that Abraham had, because he had a direct conversation with a messenger of God. Okay, Abraham had great faith. This woman heard from a parent or somebody about what had happened before she was born, probably. About what this God of these Hebrew people have done. And she heard it. And she believed that that God was the true God. And she said, because I know you're coming to destroy us. Please, if I save you, you save me. That's the faith that James is talking about. If we truly believe God, and we believe that he says he is who he says he is, and he will do what he says he will do, just like Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son because he believed God would promise him descendants through Isaac. He says, I don't understand, but I have faith in you. That resulted in a work that I can't comprehend. But the obedience, because he had true faith in God, resulted in obedience, which produced works. In Rahab's case, it produced works. Because she believed, she was willing to risk her life to save these men because she believed that they were coming to destroy them, and that their God was the true God. That's what James means. It's not do good works to be saved. It's like if you truly believe God is who he says he is, obey him, and the works will naturally follow. And those works demonstrate the genuineness of your faith. It's not one or the other, it's both together. If you truly believe God and you truly have faith that he is who he says he is, then why do we not obey God? Why is our life not marked by obedience, which would result in the works that everybody could see, and God would receive the glory? That's my take on it. But don't forget those stories, and don't forget the story of Rahab. What a beautiful story that is on just someone who had seen and heard, hadn't seen, had heard, and yet believed. That's us. We didn't see what happened in the New Testament. That's us. We are the Rahabs of this story. We weren't the disciples that were with him. We weren't the first century people that saw Jesus and heard him teach maybe and saw the crucifixion. We didn't see any of that. We've heard someone tell us about it, and we've believed. We are the Rahabs. We have faith that what happened happened because somebody told us, and we believe this. We're the same as Rahab. You ever thought about that? Our faith is the same as Rahab. We're believing what somebody told us. We've not seen it, but we're believing it. And our hope is that someday he will save us from the destruction to come, just like her. The earth is to be destroyed, but we're trusting something we've been told. If I believe this, we're trusting that he will save us from that. It's the same. We're the Rahabs. I just think it's a beautiful story. Pastor Milton, will you close us in prayer?